Welcome back. The UN General Assembly kicks off tomorrow, and the state of the global economy is guaranteed to be a topic of discussion. In the United States, hopes are high that a recovery is underway after optimistic comments from Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke. But in Canada, the outlook is a bit more cautious. Officials there saying that the country is likely still in a recession and the recovery will be slow. Joining me now to talk about that in the first on CNBC interview is Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Mr. Prime Minister, so nice to have you back on the program.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank you so much for joining us once again. The last time we spoke, we were at the G20 in London.
That's right.
And I guess we were in the middle of what was a slow period for the global economy. How would you characterize things right now?
Well, I think we have a fragile recovery. I think that's the best way to put it. We're certainly seeing the beginnings of some growth in Canada. But I wouldn't underestimate in Canada, the United States, globally, how much this growth really is due to stimulus measures, monetary and fiscal measures. We haven't yet seen a real rebound in private investment that will sustain the recovery globally. So we're very cautious. We're continuing to implement our stimulus program, seeing some growth, but not yet seeing the kind of growth that will improve our labor market. Of course, that's what's important for most people.
What do you think it's going to take to get people spending money again? You know, when we spoke the last time at the G20 in London, we talked a lot about the fact that the Canadian banks actually really outpaced the U.S. banks in terms of credit and in terms of the financial upset, where so many of the U.S. banks were brought to their knees, actually. What's most important? Is it getting credit moving again? Is it getting the consumer out shopping? Is it getting tax cuts out to the people? What do you think is going to be the magic bullet, if there is one?
I don't think there's a magic bullet. I think what we've got to make sure is that when we have the next wave of growth, that it's built on a sustainable basis. We think globally there are three things that are really important. I mentioned it's important we continue to implement stimulus measures. We also have to take steps to resist protectionism. If we want to see recession continue for a very long time, let's slip away from open markets. That'll do it in a flash. And those countries, like the United States particularly, that have had problems in the financial sector, those problems have to be fixed. There has to have to be better, more sensible regulatory environment in the future to really carry us forward.
In the meantime, we see commodities continuing to rise in value. What's your sense in terms of demand for oil and gas at this point?
Well, look, my strong view is that over the longer term, we're going to continue to see strong demand for fossil fuels. I tell people in my country and in my party, this is one of the reasons we should be concerned about climate change, not just emissions. But in the long term, I think the demand for fossil fuels really is outstripping low-cost supply. So I think, to the extent Canada is a strong energy-producing country, those commodities will continue to be in strong demand, and obviously have helped our economy, will continue to help our economy, but we're going to have to diversify our energy sources.
Where are you seeing the most demand in terms of energy right now? I mean, we talked so long about this insatiable thirst coming out of China. Right. Is that still the growth story as it relates to energy or elsewhere?
Well, we operate in Canada. Our energy market is almost totally a private sector, market-driven phenomenon. It's not the government doesn't engineer the energy markets. Obviously, we've seen strong demand in oil. I think it's both a symptom of some recovery, is probably also a symptom of countries like China buying up supply. Natural gas is more worrisome. The prices have not recovered there to a sufficient level. But we're confident in due course that will occur, just because, as I say, the sheer demand for fossil fuel relative to the long-term situation of low-cost supply means that prices are going to rise.
Prime Minister Harper, let me ask you about something you just mentioned, and that's protectionism.
Yeah.
Earlier this week, or last week rather, we saw President Obama put new restrictions on tires coming out of China, and so far we saw some retaliation out of China, although it feels like retaliation anyway. New restrictions on Hollywood movies going into China, restrictions on poultry. Do you worry about a trade war? Do you worry about these kind of actions leading to protectionism?
Yeah, I don't want to pick on any particular action, because, as you know, the Chinese will see that as protectionism. Some in the American administration will very much see that as enforcing the trade rules that do exist, and we do have rules to govern trade. But there is a drift towards protectionism in the world. It's not an overwhelming drift, but it's one that concerns us. Obviously, we have the Buy America here. We have the domestic procurement policies. We did not pursue that route in our stimulus package. What we did in Canada is we did the opposite. We actually lowered tariffs on imported machinery and equipment, not just to stimulate our economy, but help stimulate global growth. We believe very strongly, the Canadian experience is clear, open markets are good for our economy and the global economy in the long term. We can never forget that virtually all of the growth we've seen in the past generation has been due to the opening of markets globally. And we try and warn all players to be very cautious about any steps that would tend to roll that back. We saw in the 1930s how a big recession became a big depression because markets closed.
And in a similar vein, you worked with the banking sector, with business, in order to encourage businesses to create jobs.
Yeah, first of all, Canada's situation was different. We have not had a bank failure. The government has not been putting public money into financial institutions. We had a well-regulated sector that had acted in a prudent way, good prudent management of our major banks and financial institutions. We have worked with some government agencies to ensure that there is a supply of credit in parts of the economy that have been affected by the global credit crisis. But as I say, by and large, we've been fortunate that we've been able to keep the government out of day-to-day banking in our country.